Mr. Joey Styles.
Mike, nice to be here, and I'm sure you have some questions for me, and I'm willing to answer anything.
I have questions for you. Everybody knows about your stint being the play-by-play and the voice of ECW the original years.
The original ECW, yes.
The original ECW from 1993 to 2000.
Correct.
How did you get started? Exactly. Like, how did you get brought in? Because I remember, I looked it up. The job was originally for Myke Quest.
Myke Quest, yep. I always wanted to be a wrestling announcer. That was my goal. I chose Hofstra University on Long Island for that reason, because Pro Wrestling Illustrated was published on Long Island near Hofstra. My plan was to spend a couple of years working for the university, working for the newspaper, and writing press releases, which is what I did. My junior year, I went and got an internship with Pro Wrestling Illustrated. Worked for Craig Peters and Bill Apter, gave me my first break, and then took me to my first live events. And then Paul Heyman came in one day, and we exchanged information. And upon graduation, I went to work selling advertising, which I was always going to do. I wanted to have both careers. And when Paul took over as the booker, or the head of creative for the original ECW, he brought me in, and I did both jobs for 7 years.
For 7 years. Now, when you talk about doing both jobs, like, is it like because everybody knows from watching either the shoot videos or watching from like the behind-the-scenes stuff, everything is pretty much done in Paul's mom's basement.
It actually wasn't Paul's mom's basement. It was a gentleman named Ron Buffone, who we had two cameramen who also then edited the show. And Ron actually lived in the house first. We actually did the on-cameras in the basement and did the voiceovers in his bedroom. Ron went ahead and got married and moved out. And his former bedroom was still the editing suite, and the basement is where we shot the on-cameras in Pelham Manor, New York. So it wasn't full-time. I would go to the live events in Philly or New York. We did those every, I got to the point where we did them every weekend. And then I would go Tuesday mornings at 5 o'clock in the morning, and from 5 until 8 do the voiceovers, and then get on a train and go to my job in Manhattan selling advertising.
Ah, so you're a pretty busy person for yourself there.
Yeah, the first time I ever have worked in wrestling full-time is now with WWE.
No, where it's just non-stop, just wrestling all the time.
That's it. I have no other job.
On the website and everything now.
Yeah.
Doing play-by-play by yourself, was it something hard to establish? Was it, like, because you had people not only just from the Pennsylvania or the tri-state area, you had people coming from Canada, you had people coming from Mexico, you had people coming from Japan, and learning all these different types of moves and trying to absorb everything in, and you being the only person doing play-by-play and color commentary. Was it hard to do at first?
Hard work shouldn't be hard if you love what you do. You should work hard at whatever you do. So there was a lot of research involved in terms of the Lucha Libre style and the Japanese strong style, and international superstars coming into ECW. But I did my homework. In terms of working by myself, I find it easier than working with a color man, because you have to have timing with the color man and bounce back and forth, and just to be out there by yourself, I found it easier to call the action and make observations, and then I could actually make counterpoints to my own observations. You don't necessarily have to argue with your color man, whereas I can say A, then again, some people might look at it as B, and I was able to do all that, and it made it easier for preparation not to work with somebody, quite frankly.
Well, that's good. The people that you did work with, at certain times you worked with Mick Foley. You had Rick Rude for a couple of shows coming in, and all these other people as well. What was your favorite match to call in ECW, though? Because I have to say, my favorite match to listen to you call would have to be the first pay-per-view. It was Barely Legal.
The two events that will always stand out to me, which I consider the alpha and the omega of the original ECW, was Barely Legal. It's our first pay-per-view. It was our first live show. It was the first time I was ever on live TV, so it was sink or swim for me. Either I was going to make a career out of being a wrestling announcer, or I wasn't, and I think that evening was validation for me that I could do this. And then ECW One Night Stand 2005, which was actually produced by WWE, but run completely like an original ECW show, was closure for all of us who needed it. So those two events, I believe, are the alpha and omega of the original ECW, and I wish I had retired from play-by-play after ECW One Night Stand 2005. I think that no, sir, I think that should have been the end.
It should have been the end for your run.
Yeah.
like I was saying about the Barely Legal, my favorite match that I've ever seen you call was the 6-man tag.
The Japanese stars from Michinoku Pro Wrestling?
Yes.
That took a lot of research. I'm dating myself, but it was actually videotapes, VHS back then. So I had to get my hands on a lot of VHS tapes. I had people help me with research, and then they made a substitution in one of the wrestlers they sent over. So, of course, the internet wasn't that prevalent at the time, so it was a lot of last-minute research. But it's like anything else. You do your research, you have the notes in front of you, and as long as you don't sound like you're reading your notes, you can pepper them in. You have to have the names down pat, which was, I think Gran Naniwa was the most difficult one to say. But other than that, you get the history down, you have notes on their careers, you have to learn the names of the moves they're doing, some of which have an English name and a Japanese name, and if you can use both, then fans who know both styles really appreciate it. You're doing that hard work for the fans who will appreciate it. And
I'm pretty sure out of all the fans, they appreciate your commentating more than anybody. As far as I know from our listeners, people enjoy your commentating and JR's commentating, I have to say. Now, for the stint of time between you went before, from 2001 to 2005,
yep,
you did nothing. You had nothing to do with wrestling.
Correct. I
did actually meet you one time before. It was in Philly Arena when they did XPW.
Oh, God.
It's funny because I actually had a tryout match that night.
Did you really?
Yes, before the show. I wrestled at that time with Gavin Quest.
Okay.
I wasn't on the show. It was a tryout match before the show even started.
It's the one appearance I made for them, and they were dishonest with me as to where the money was coming from. So when they paid me, I returned the money and told them not to use that footage going forward. And even today, when you buy any of their DVDs, I am not on them.
That's 100% true, because I actually tried finding that DVD and I couldn't find it with you on it. From the time that you weren't working with WWE and this stint, were you just working as your normal job?
Yeah. I mean, selling advertising, absolutely. That's one of the reasons that I always wanted both careers. Pro wrestling can be very tenuous.
Yes.
And it also gave me the ability to call my own shots. I could have gone back in to wrestling in 2001, and I chose not to.
You chose to just take that little step back, take a little break, and you can learn everything?
No, it wasn't a matter of learning. I thought I was done. I absolutely thought I was finished, and life goes on, and I became a father, and I was going to sell advertising, and it didn't, it's life goes on. Announcing wrestling was what I did, but it was never who I was.
Never who he was. Now, when you got the call, wait, who gave you the call? Was it WWE that gave you the call saying we're doing what I'm saying, or was it Paul Lee saying?
I received several calls from different people, and I continued to say no until I finally worked out a deal with somebody in executive management to do the one show.
Just the one show?
Yes, that was going to be the plan.
And then once they did the One Night Stand, which I have to say was the best-selling pay-per-view WWE has had in years.
It was, I believe, in terms of DVD sales at the time, it wound up, the DVD of the Rise and Fall of ECW was second only to WrestleMania, which then spurred the idea to do ECW One Night Stand 2005. And I don't remember what the buy rate was, but I do remember it was very good.
Yeah, it was definitely very good, and it was very, like, my favorite match of the night was Chris Jericho versus Lance Storm.
It was, at the time it was going to be Lance's last match. I think he's only wrestled once since then, and
yeah, he pretty much just does the Feds or by his school.
Yeah, yep, and he really doesn't wrestle full time. He's got the Storm Wrestling Academy. He just had one of his students signed to Florida Championship Wrestling, which is WWE's developmental system.
Yes.
And I'll be going to Calgary this Monday, so I will see Lance. Lance has not aged a bit.
He's a man that kept his body in shape and did everything the right way.
Lance did several interviews in the original ECW that he had the best natural physique in the business, and it was true, and he still does.
100%. Now, coming from One Night Stand, you only said that you wanted to do one time.
Yes.
And how did things work out to where you were gonna, because originally you were brought onto Raw, right?
Well, what happened was I did One Night Stand, and I had what was then a part-time contract, and I was told, well, if it works, we're going to do a One Night Stand 2006, so we'd like you to sign a contract. And I think maybe that was only because TNA was in existence, although I really didn't have any desire to go back into wrestling. So then WWE, for whatever reason, fired Jim Ross. I still don't understand that. And frankly, maybe because I had the stigma of the original ECW, and I was under contract, a part-time contract, they still didn't want me to be the guy. So they called Mike Goldberg from UFC and tried to hire him. I remember that. And one morning, he was public in that he turned it down, and my wife turned to me and she goes, "You know, we're getting a call from WWE today." I said, "About what?" She goes, "Well, Mike Goldberg turned them down, and they already took JR off the air, so they're going to call you." I said, "Well, if they wanted me to do it, they had me. You know, I'm under contract to do next year's One Night Stand if there is one." And sure enough, my phone rang that day, and it was a 4-week trial. You know, I don't know if it was so much about my work, but to see if
you like
if I fit in.
If you fit in, because I understand what people do. The commentator for the live shows on Raw, they have the earpiece or the headset,
Yeah.
and it's just pretty much Vince or whoever else is doing creative control on the other side, pretty much telling you what to say.
It's not always Vince. I've been produced by Stephanie as well, and I think people get the wrong idea because you know, Mick Foley's been most verbal about it in his current book, which I'll help him plug, Countdown to Lockdown, available on Amazon.com and Borders.com and BarnesandNoble.com. And it's not necessarily that Vince would always yell, because he wouldn't. And Stephanie would never yell. She couldn't be any sweeter. But frankly, I don't want to be fed verbiage in my ear. And my buddy Hurricane helps.
I'll go take my mask.
All right.
Buzz me before you leave.
I will. And frankly, I don't want to have verbiage fed into my headset and repeat it. It's not fun. So I won't do it.
Now going from Raw to ECW, you guys the whole storyline for the 2006 One Night Stand,
Yep.
and then you guys finally got to ECW.
Yep.
How do you feel about the WWE's version of ECW?
I couldn't stand it. I refer to it as WWE ECW, and I understand why